When Google Stadia was launched back in 2019, I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is a game changer. What? Horrible pun? Horrible pun first up? Okay, sorry, let's continue. What it essentially was, as called by some, was a Netflix, but for games. You pay Google a monthly or annual fee, and that would give you access to Google's library of games, which you can play remotely without any lag or any frame drops. This is because you would play the game on a dedicated server, not on any device, your phone or your laptop or your console, but on a high performance server maintained by Google specifically for running Stadia. You could also play completely free, but then you would have to face some drawbacks. Remember what you learned about input, process, output in smaller computer classes? Yeah, let's remind that. In computers, input is what you give to the computer. So in PCs, that would be your computer and your mouse. And the process is basically the place where it computes whatever task has been given to it, right? So in PC, the process would be done in the CPU. The output is the place where the computer shows the result. So that would be the screen in this case. In terms of console, the input would be given by the controller. The process would be done by the console itself. And the output would be the TV screen or the screen that you've connected it to. In Stadia, the input can be your keyboard or your mouse or your controller or even your phone, depending on which device you're using to play it. The output would again be the screen, that is the mobile screen if you're playing on a phone, and your PC or laptop screen if you are playing with the keyboard or your mouse. But the processing is where the difference lies. Where in PC and console, the processing is done in your home itself. In Stadia, the processing is done by the Stadia servers far away from your home. So how can the servers receive the input and give the output? That is done with the help of internet. So it is very much like paying Netflix a small fee so that it would give you access to the whole library. But what was the benefit, right? Well, actually multifold. You could play an extremely graphically demanding game like maybe the Red Dead Redemption 2 or the Forza Horizon on a low-end laptop or even your low-end phone, and that too with minimal frame drops and up to 4K at 60 FPS with even support for 8K at 120 FPS promised. So take this 15,000 phone running a MediaTek Helio G80, which is by all means a budget chip. With Google Stadia, assuming I have good internet connection, I could play any game in Google's library, and that too in exceptional quality. Now, this is not a new idea by any means. Cloud gaming has existed long before Stadia, but cloud gaming on such a wide scale with support for so many devices at the extreme quality and close to zero latency, with all of those completely being on the cloud, that was a new idea. Speaking of support, Stadia did not have an abundance of support. The initial reviews were not very enthusiastic. The community were not the biggest fan of the idea. Google couldn't meet their targets in terms of both the sales of the controller and the number of active users. This subsequently meant that Google couldn't reach the revenue level they had planned. And ultimately, it had to wind up. Stadia will be stopping the service officially from January 18th of 2023. So what happened, right? Why was it that Google was forced to pull the plug on this seemingly revolutionary idea? Here's what I think. Remember how I said in the beginning that once you paid the annual or monthly fee to Google, you could access all the games in Stadia's library? Yeah, that is technically not true. The pricing strategy of Stadia was a bit strange. Like most of the services out there, Stadia also followed a two-layered approach, a free one and a paid one. The free one, called just Stadia, would give you access to 1080p 60 FPS gameplay, and you will need to pay for all the games that you play. That sounds solid, of course. But the problem lies in the premium version dubbed Stadia Pro. With the premium version, you would assume that once you have paid that fee to Stadia, then you would get all the games at no additional cost, right? That is why a premium version should exist in the first place, right? Not according to Google. Even if you had paid your $10 monthly fee for Stadia Pro, you still had to buy the games at the full cost. Now, to be fair, this is how most of the cloud gaming platforms do the business. But one major difference is the fact that while Stadia is a completely on-the-cloud service, the other competitors mostly offer it as an add-on on top of their hardware platforms. Microsoft has the Xbox Cloud Gaming as an add-on to Game Pass. Sony's PlayStation Plus, along with the cloud gaming, gave an added feature in the form of emulating PS3 games from the library. One tiny difference was maybe seen in Amazon Luna, who didn't have a physical game console to offer it as an add-on, but still giving that fee to Amazon gave you access to the whole library and you wouldn't have to purchase games at the additional cost. Also, the subset of people needing Stadia was really tiny, to be frank. They need to have a high-speed internet, they also need to have a decent TV, and they don't currently own a gaming console. So you have to pay a monthly fee to get access to the service, but that did not give you access to the whole library, and the controller was as good as a showpiece when you're not using the service. Definitely strange. Sundar Pichai had joked at the Stadia launch event that the company's only prior experience in gaming was that dinosaur game that appeared when you were offline. Even though obviously he meant it as a joke, it also kind of showed how vastly inexperienced Google was in the industry. Inexperience is not always equal to failure, because as a company you can always hire more talented and skilled people to make up for that inexperience, right? But anyway, that was the primary reason, Google's inexperience in the field. The secondary reason was that no one actually trusts Google to keep a product or service alive for more than a year or two. There is actually a website called killedbygoogle.com which lists every service or product that Google has cancelled. And in the previous year alone, 2022, they had 15 products according to the website. So most people would be extremely cautious about using a first generation Google product or service, and especially if it involves paying money to them, because you don't know whether that is the best use of the money that you're spending. And maybe Google also knew that. Instead of going the traditional route, which would be approaching those big publishers for exclusive releases on their platform like what Sony and Microsoft do, Google couldn't do that, right, because of their inexperience. So Google actually took a bold step in that they will make their own games through the publishing house Stadia Games and Entertainment, which was a bold promise. But unfortunately, it didn't turn out well for Google because they couldn't develop any of their original games. In fact, the decision to stop their in-house studio was actually made public way back in Feb of 2021, which is almost 2 years before the service itself was stopped. Another factor that added to the increase in cost was that Stadia ran on Linux, which historically hasn't been a platform which is gamer friendly. So the developers had to make their game on a completely different platform than what they had originally made. The reason that they chose Linux is due to some graphics driver stack cloud thing which I haven't fully understood, so it is beyond me. Please help me if you know what that means. Google's inexperience also meant that they initially had a very small catalog of games, and even now they only have 277 titles, which is the lowest among major cloud gaming providers. All this happened while the pandemic had begun its destruction. Hey, I kind of want to do a montage. Can I? Yeah, thank you.
आज रात 12 बजे से संपूर्ण देश में संपूर्ण लॉकडाउन होने जा रहा है।
People were forced to stay indoors. The pandemic would have been a perfect launchpad for Stadia to be something more than what its creators had originally envisioned. Imagine you are a cloud gaming provider and it hasn't been doing as well as you had thought it would be, and then suddenly there's this global pandemic which is forcing people to stay indoors, and they need something desperately to keep them occupied. Besides, there was this global chipset shortage resulting in consoles being expensive and out of stock. But sadly, Google couldn't capitalize on this jackpot. But I can't stop thinking, what if Google was able to do to cloud gaming what Meta did to VR during the pandemic? Ultimately, by the end of the pandemic, Stadia had begun losing its fame while its competitors were running away with the users. Further, the whole structure that Google based Stadia upon was a bit troublesome according to some reports, and Ars Technica has done a very well-made article on it, and I will link that below. Google bet heavily that their cloud advantage and their software prowess would be enough to propel this platform. But as they learned, cloud gaming is more hardware than cloud. The publicity that Stadia received was mostly confined to the enthusiast crowd, or more so the online crowd. They primarily advertised on the online platforms and not on the traditional ones like billboards or TVs, and they also did not have a place in retail stores where people could come in and experience this demo physically. It was almost as if Google had made up its mind on the future of Stadia. Google was a bit inexperienced in the field, but that didn't stop them from promising beyond the sun and the moon. Maybe they underestimated the effort needed to meet these promises. The most glaring of it, which we had discussed previously, was the decision to make their own games, which of course backfired. The team was dissolved even before they were given a chance to prove themselves. I have to speculate, at one point, Stadia was visioned to be something much larger than what it eventually became, but they couldn't meet the promises because of some technological barriers or otherwise. But as it turned out, Stadia didn't reach the scale that Google hoped it would. Since Google also needed to sell the controllers, the distribution was also seen as a barrier, but somehow Google miraculously promised support in 200 countries for Stadia. As you would know by now, it was just Google underestimating the effort needed to meet their promises, and another instance of overpromise underdeliver. Out of these 200, only half of them had an average internet speed of 10 Mbps, which was the recommended minimum speed. Eventually, what happened was that Stadia was available in only 23 countries, which is a mere 11.5% of their promise. Another instance of overpromise underdeliver was what Google called negative latency. Latency, as you know, is the difference between me pressing a button and me seeing that output on the screen. So the lower, the better. So zero latency meant that as soon as I press the button, I would see that output instantly. So did negative latency mean that I would see the output on the screen even before I press the button? Close, actually. What Google essentially envisioned was a tech whereby the algorithm would predict the input of the player in certain conditions so that it can render the frames earlier and reduce the latency. But it turned out that even though the idea was a futuristic one, it was not yet viable, which leads us to another case of overpromise, underdeliver. Even though there was a tiny bit of an improvement in the latency, it was not anything substantial to term it as negative latency. Again, what if Google had kept their promises low and been patient with it and still delivered what they had delivered? I guess we'll never know. Even though Google made a few vital mistakes in terms of the pricing, the estimation of the effort needed, and the role played by experience, since this idea was a fascinating one, there were a few glimpses of success through the way. Users unanimously reported that the promised frame rates and response times were almost always accomplished, which we know by now were overpromised, but delivered, over-delivered, if that makes sense. So that was a massive plus in the books, and it was also far better than its competitors, and it was near fantastical how you would not be doing anything and then instantly you would be playing a graphically demanding game within just a matter of seconds. An observable case was made with Cyberpunk 2077, which was an excruciating experience in most of the consoles early in release, and also almost all of the laptops which were not high-end. These were the minimum specs needed to run it, while these were the recommended specs. And coming to phones, there was never Cyberpunk release for mobile platforms. But thanks to Stadia, anyone who did not have a console or a high-end PC could comfortably play the game with minimal performance issues. It was as simple as going to Stadia, hitting a button, and then instantly you'll be playing a graphically demanding game. Stadia players also experienced far lesser number of the notorious bugs that console and PC players faced. All in all, I think this was the perfect example that portrayed the technical prowess and the comfort and the future of cloud gaming to plenty. Stadia was like a demo of what cloud gaming would be in the future, and it was almost as if Google was in it for the short term and not ready for a long-term future commitment. And that, I believe, is a perfect segue to the final section of the video, the future impact of Stadia on cloud gaming. Google wasn't the first in the industry, they rarely are. They always believe in second mover advantage. But it was only after Stadia arrived that others started taking this game more seriously by taking advantage of Stadia's weaknesses. All of them realized that maybe they shouldn't charge extra for individual games, and that single monthly or annual fee should give them access to the whole library. Now, as to what would happen to the developers, the exclusive games, and the subscribers, we have to believe that the developers would be given some sort of a compensation, because not giving that would be a massive black mark for Google. As for the subscribers, those who put the money in, refunds for their purchases of games and in-store items have already begun, which is a really sweet move from Google. They will also get the refund for the controller while getting to keep it. Again, sweet move. Even though Google did not make any games of their own, they still had a few Stadia exclusive games which were developed by the other developers. As for those games, unless the other platforms show an interest in buying the rights for the title, there's a good chance that these games might just go off the market, which is very unfortunate. Google showed that while the concept as such, cloud gaming, is a viable opportunity, the tech is not yet viable. It also prompted other companies to take the game of cloud gaming more seriously. It also did not help that Google's version had a few serious flaws and the competitors were quick to capitalize on that. Personally, I'm upset that Stadia is going away. It is one concept that genuinely invoked excitement and curiosity in me. It was good to see such a large company taking a massive risk. As Stadia came to an end on the 18th of this month, Google for once tried to be among the first in the industry, and it just so happened that they were ill prepared and had to face all of the first generation mistakes, maybe a bit too much than they had expected. Perhaps it arrived a bit too soon. And like Tom Warren of The Verge said, it was a good beta test for the future of gaming.